So I'm Genevieve Sarlo with the Army Corps of Engineers, Philadelphia District. I did the federal permits for this project, and we were a cooperating agency with U.S. Fish and Wildlife while everyone was trying to figure out how we were going to tackle these sediment enrichment projects, or other, also known as thin layer. I know no one likes to hear that. So really quickly, I'm just going to go through the regulations, and then I'm going to specifically talk about good luck point and what worked and why it worked for us while we were doing the whole permitting process. So what's regulated? We have Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, which authorizes the Corps to permit structures or work in navigable waters of the United States. And we also have 404 permits, which authorizes the Corps to permit any discharge of dredge material or fill material into waters of the United States. Right here is just a quick diagram to show you the extent of the Section 10 and 404 authorities. So Section 10 ends at the mean high water line, and 404 goes up to high tide line, as well as extending beyond the high tide line to any wetlands. So what kind of permits do we have? We have individual permits. These are generally reserved for projects with potential for substantial environmental impacts, so just bigger projects. Anything that's not covered in our general permits, our nationwide permits, we have like 57 of them at this point. Individual permits require public notice. They also require us to coordinate with the agencies, the other resource agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries Service. General permits, we don't need to spend too much time here, but smaller dredging projects can be covered under certain nationwide permits, but that didn't happen for this project. For standard permits, I really like this slide. I wanted to keep it in because I want people to look at this list of things that are necessary for public notice and also to issue a permit. Purpose and need, I want to point out, is super important. A descriptive and specific purpose and need statement is the driving aspect of this entire project or even permitting process. I can always pull this back up later, but there's just a specific list for individual permits, what we need for public notice, and also for the permit decision. So the biggest thing with these sediment enrichment projects was we had to meet the 404B1 guidelines. So what are the 404B1 guidelines, and what do they say? So they specifically say no discharge of dredge or fill material shall be permitted if there is a practicable alternative to the proposed discharge which would have less adverse impacts on the aquatic ecosystem, so long as the alternative does not have other significant adverse environmental consequences. So that's a whole lot to take in. But basically what this is saying is, if there's an alternative elsewhere or even on site that could have been done to meet the purpose and need of the project, that would be the preferred alternative if it was having less of an environmental impact. This is just going more into alternatives analysis and what the 404B1 guidelines are looking for. So I'm not going to spend too much time because I don't want to go over my time for this presentation. So for good luck point, standard permit was issued for the dredging aspect of it to New Jersey DOT, and also a standard permit was issued to U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the placement of dredge material and the monitoring and all of that for what was on site at Good Luck Point. Normally what we do is we want a single and complete project. So normally we would see dredging and the discharge of fill onto the site all in one permit. However, for this one, the Corps decided, and this is the first time we ever did anything like this, but the dredging permit, it included the disposal site as one of its potential sites for disposal of their material. So we said, okay, we can look at this as one single and complete project. And the restoration aspect of Good Luck Point we looked at as another single and complete project. So it's a possibility to split the dredging and the placement or just the restoration portion of the project, separate them into different permits. Like Virginia mentioned, we were a cooperating agency for the project before the application was sent out. So we were able to make sure that Fish and Wildlife was sending us something we wanted to see and not just a bunch of words on a piece of paper that didn't really help us review and analyze what was going on. I know National Marine Fisheries Service was at the table when we were talking about it, and obviously U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was at the table. So we were able to discuss a lot of those consultation hurdles that we see while while initiating consultation for permits before the application came in. So that was super helpful. Okay, so back to purpose and need. Purpose and need statement, I think when we were working on this before the application came in, I think we all really tried to narrow this down, but also keep it super specific. So that is the goal. When you're putting a purpose and need statement together for projects like this, you want it to be very, very specific as to what you're doing and where you're doing it and why. So I just put the beginning statement of the purpose and need statement from their application on this slideshow. But they also went into detail about the history of the site, why they were doing this, and just explaining everything and what they saw the future looking like for this site. So the more information they gave us, the better it was, because we were able to really see like what they were actually trying to accomplish here. Back on the 404B1 guidelines, I know I rushed through them a little earlier, but what the Corps is really looking at when we're trying to make sure we're meeting the 404B1 guidelines, we're looking at like on like, right? So when it comes to contamination, when it comes to what type of material is being dredged and what type of material is being what type of materials on site, we want to try to make it as similar as possible. We don't want to put more contaminated material on a clean site, and vice versa. So we're really looking at the contaminants for the dredge material, making sure that they match what's already existing on the site. And New Jersey DEP, actually, during their whole permitting process, they're very thorough and they do a very good job. So normally when we get the okay from New Jersey DEP for a project, we know that we're meeting our 404B1 guidelines. And also, there was a lot of discussion about what type of material we wanted the dredge material to be made up of. So we didn't want to just put a bunch of sand on a site and then you're just creating a sandy area and you've just destroyed the entire marsh. So we took into account, if it was like a silty loam or anything like that, they tested all of that as well. Other considerations that were made for the disposal of dredge material, so how was the material going to be put on site was a big thing for us. How are you placing the pipe down and spreading the material out? What elevations are we looking for? There are certain elevations for different plant species to grow. So we were making sure that we were the applicant was meeting targeted elevations for what they were looking for. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife did a really good job. They broke down all the elevations for each section, or I believe in the application they were called cells at Good Luck Point. Target elevations explained what types of habitat they would be creating, whether that was low marsh or high marsh. And the last thing, before I thought I was ready to go to the next slide, the last thing was containment. So we're putting this material on site and we were all discussing, I know this took a while, was whether or not we wanted containment or we didn't want containment. We didn't want material to kind of flow into other areas that weren't a part of the project. And also we didn't want too much material to move out because we were trying to meet certain elevations. So that's super important to be discussed and to be explained in your application. And lastly, again, I'm going to say alternatives analysis. U.S. Fish and Wildlife considered other methods of wetland restoration in their alternatives analysis. So what we're looking for is a no action alternative. Explain why that is not your preferred alternative, why doing nothing to the site wouldn't meet the purpose and need of the project. On-site alternatives, what other methods did you consider and why aren't those methods meeting that purpose and need? Or is it meeting the purpose and need and it's has less impact to the environment? Then that would end up being your preferred alternative. And also off-site alternatives. For this one, the purpose and need statement specifically said they wanted to restore the marsh at Good Luck Point. So other off-site alternatives were not discussed for this project. So that's what I mean by if you have a really specific a really specific purpose and need, you're able to get through these alternatives that we're looking for and able to say, well, we didn't look at off-site because we're trying to fix this specific marsh. And lastly, the adaptive management and monitoring plan. I don't know if that's going to be discussed further into this presentation today, but we share copies of the monitoring plan and the adaptive management plan with people all the time who want to do something similar, because they really U.S. Fish and Wildlife really gave us what we were asking for with that monitoring plan. And as you could see below, they really broke it down to specific things that they were looking at and using these separate categories that they're doing monitoring on to see where adaptive management was needed to meet the success criteria of the permit.